Morning, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple minutes to give people time to join. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're still seeing the participant numbers clicking up, so we're going to give it another minute or two till that starts to level off, and then we'll get started. Hey, good morning, everyone. Our participant numbers are they're still clicking upwards, but a little bit slower. So I think we'll get started with the introduction, and hopefully by the time we start with the meaty material, we'll have stabilized participant numbers. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. I'm Susie Rose, the Program Manager of the Electrical Safety Policy Division here at the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety, also known as Energy Safety. At today's workshop, Energy Safety will be presenting Package 1 of the draft Wildfire Mitigation Plan that we'll refer to as WMP guidelines, which was published on November 12th, 2024. These draft WMP guidelines will first be applicable to the Electrical Corporation's 2026 to 2028 base WMP submissions. The Package 1 draft includes 4 chapters, which are the introduction, the process and evaluation chapter, the technical requirements chapter, and the petition to amend chapter. Package 1 also includes 1 associated attachment and 5 appendices. Package 2 materials will be discussed at a forthcoming workshop after those materials are published in draft form, and we'll let you know today what those materials will be. The submission schedule for the 2026 to 2028 base WMPs, which will be submitted by the electrical corporations in 2025, will be released at a later date, and we'll talk a little bit more about that today as well. The goal of this workshop is to receive input from stakeholders and the public on the Package 1 components of the draft WMP guidelines. We'll spend most of our time today reviewing the changes between the existing 2023 to 2025 WMP guidelines and the draft WMP guidelines that we published a few weeks ago, as well as taking comments and responding to questions on the draft. Energy Safety is also accepting written comments on the draft WMP guidelines. The comment deadlines for Packet 1 of the draft WMP guidelines are provided in the cover letter to the publication, and as a reminder, are December 6th for the opening comments and December 12th for reply comments. Energy Safety will take all written comments and comments received here today into consideration when preparing the final WMP guidelines documents. Thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to your questions and your feedback. And I'll now turn to Dakota Smith for further introductory and housekeeping items. Over to you, Dakota.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Susie. Hi, everyone. I'm Dakota, and I'll be going through the intro and the housekeeping items. We can start with a quick safety message just to remind everyone to please be aware the surroundings and just to make sure that you know all of your emergency exits and then just in case there is an emergency, since we are all in all different places with this workshop as a virtual one. And if you feel something, then please say something and let us know. And just a reminder to take regular breaks and to get up and stretch. We do have a break scheduled in, so please take advantage of that. And then just have emergency contact information available if needed. With that, we can talk about the agenda. We have a 3-hour workshop this morning. We're in the intro right now, and then after that, we'll have a segment on the process and evaluation chapter of the draft guidelines. We have some slides on that, and then we'll have some time after that for some questions and some comments, and then we have that break, and then after that we have some slides on the technical elements that chapter, and then we will also have more time for comments and questions, and then at the end of all that I have a couple slides to close us out. The objectives of the workshop is to present package 1 of the draft guidelines that will apply after adoption. That will start with the base plans that will be submitted next year. And then I just note on that a petition to amend that chapter will be effective immediately upon adoption. And beyond that, we're going to talk about the objectives and proposed updates for the entire package 1 that document. And then we will provide an opportunity for stakeholder feedback on the draft guidelines, and provide an opportunity for stakeholders to ask any questions that they want to use that could inform other written comments that are due after the workshop. So just some other information on the workshop. Verbal comments and questions will be taken at the end of the sessions, so one on the process a chapter, and then one on the technical chapter. If you do have a question or comment, then please raise your hand on Zoom, and we will we'll unmute you to ask your questions. And then you can also write comments into the chat window at any time, as opposed to asking them verbally. If you do ask a question verbally, then please let everyone know who you are before you ask your question. And just a reminder that the workshop will be recorded and posted on our website and the docket. And then once we have the workshop, we'll be posting this, and then we'll just send out a notice with all this material for you to have. Yeah, so that was the workshop kind of a background. And so now we have some background on the WMPs and the guidelines in general. Electrical corporations, or ECs, are required to prepare and submit these plans to energy safety as required by 8389B. These plans describe how the EC is constructing, maintaining, and operating its electrical lines and equipment in a manner that will minimize the risk of catastrophic wildfires. Energy safety has authority under the Government Code section 15475.3 to adopt guidelines that set forth the requirements and timings and any other matters are required to exercise its powers to perform its duties and meet its responsibilities. So that's why we're here with these guidelines. And then on the WMPs, the base plans are submitted every 3 years. Electrical corporations submit updates in each interim year. So for some examples of that, previously the other corporations submitted their 2023 to 25 base plans. In the spring of 2023, we evaluated and approved each of those base plans, and then in last March, the ECs submitted their 2025 updates, which we are currently evaluating, and then the base plans for the next cycle, which will be a 2026 through a 2028. That's what these guidelines will cover, and that evaluation schedule is forthcoming. So now we can talk about the suite of the documents and other publication packages that we have published and that we're scheduling to publish. This is a comparison between our existing suite of documents and our proposed suite of documents. As you can see, we currently have with our existing documents, we currently had the technical guidelines, the process guidelines, the ITO supplement to the technical guidelines, and then separate documents for the maturity model and the maturity survey. So we currently have 5 standalone documents. What we are proposing to do is essentially only have 2. We would have just like other draft guidelines, which would contain the process, a chapter, the technical chapter, a petition to amend chapter, and the ITO a supplement chapter. So that is basically merging the technical guidelines, the process guidelines, and the ITO supplement into one, and then the draft, a maturity model, and survey guidelines would be merged into one as well, just to make it a little bit more efficient and easier to follow. But then this is proposed to be published in 2 packages. And in package 1, which we published on the 12th, that's what you see here, and that's what we will be talking about at this workshop. That includes the chapter 1, which was just the intro chapter, and then the process and evaluation chapter, the technical elements chapter, the petition to amend chapter, and then we have attachments and appendices in addition to those. For package 2, we are anticipating that to be published in the middle of next month, and then we will have a separate workshop on the documents on these packages, and then like that will include the draft electrical corporation, wildfire, a maturity model and survey guidelines, as well as the ITO supplement chapter, which will be a chapter 5 of the overall draft guidelines document. And that is all of the background info we have. So with that, we can move on to the process and evaluation chapter, and I'll hand it over to Zhen Ying.
Thank you, Dakota. Hi, everyone. I am Zhen Shao. I will be presenting the notable changes highlighted in the process, the evaluation chapter, and as well as the petition to amend chapter and appendices. Next slide, please. So for the proposed process and evaluation chapter, there are 5 sections as listed here. The section 1, the WMP submission information, that covers the single point of contact and document posting. For the section 2, the general instruction covers the qualitative, quantitative, and tabulated responses, mapping requirements, relevant regulations, code standards and guideline instructions, foundational documents, glossaries, and best practice. The section 3, collaboration, is a new section. It requires electrical cooperation to attend and participate in workshops, working groups, scoping meetings, joint studies, and any other collaborations as directed. The section 4 includes the section 4 evaluation of the WMPs, that includes evaluation process, covering pre-submission check, WMP submission, revision notice, the decision process. The section also covers the WMP evaluation criteria. The data request log, section 5, requires each electric corporation to post a WMP data request log on its website weekly and submit the same data request log to Energy Safety on a weekly basis. Electric corporation must post and maintain the WMP data request log from the pre-submission of the WMP until the ending upon issuance of the decision of the WMP. So for the next couple of slides, we'll go through the notable changes in the process and evaluation chapter. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, I gotta pull it back up.
Thank you. So here highlighted the notable changes in the section 2, the general instructions. For the section 2.1, the WMP data, it requires each electric corporation must provide quantitative information to support its narratives and its qualitative descriptions. The electric corporation must use the example tables provided in the guidelines as templates to reporting the information required in each of the sections. The information must be submitted in Excel file matching the information in each table within the WMP, and the frequency of submission is on an annual basis, and this is outside the quarterly data reports. For the section 2.2 mapping requirements, the electric corporation must provide one representative map within the main body of its WMP, where the guidelines require to produce a map or series of maps. If additional maps are needed, the electric corporation must host applicable geospatial layers on a publicly accessible web application and then refer to the specific web address in appropriate places throughout the WMP. The section 2.5, the glossary section, requires the electric corporation must attach a glossary to the WMP that lists the terms and definition used in the WMP, which are not already defined in the Appendix A of these guidelines. The other notable changes highlighted on this slide is that the change order process has been removed, with the petition to amend the process added. The petition to amend process is the chapter 4 of the guidelines, which will be covered in the later of the presentation. Next one, please. So here, the slides highlighted the changes in the section 4 of the evaluation of the WMP, the section 4.1.1.1, the pre-submission check process. The key steps of the pre-submission checks process are highlighted here. So Energy Safety will assess each electric corporation's WMP for satisfaction of the statutory and the guidelines requirements. One thing here noted here is the pre-submission process is in the existing guidelines and was utilized in the last base WMP submission. The primary change is the pre-submission checklist that the electric corporation must complete and submit. Then Energy Safety will confirm that electric corporation provided a narrative for each section and subsection in the WMP, as well as the required tables are filled out in the WMP, including tables submitted as Excel file with the WMP. Next slide, please. In addition, Energy Safety plans to release the Energy Safety Policy Division, ESPD-wide process guidelines as a consolidated guidance for overlapped process documents with the ESPD workstream, which includes but not limiting to WMPs, safety culture assessment, safety certifications, executive compensations. The new process guidelines documents will contain items like extension request, docket access, errata, naming convention, data requests. Those were previously contained in WMP process and evaluation guidelines. This document is worked concurrently with the package 2 publications. Next one, please. Now moving to the chapter 4, the petition to amend. The petition to amend allows Electric Corporation to submit to Energy Safety a petition to amend its approved WMT to align the WMP with CPUC's decision in a general rate making case decision, also referred as the GRC decision. So the Electric Corporation must submit the petition within 45 days of the relevant GRC decision or any CPUC order modifying that decision. The petition must not include amendments unrelated to the GRC decision on which the petition is based. Also, the petition must not include any non-substantive amendments such as typos. Upon Energy Safety's approval in totality or approval in part of the petition to amend, Electric Corporation must amend the relevant year's WMP and the data submission to reflect the amendments approved and file the amended document to the relevant docket. Next one, please. And for the appendices, the appendix in the proposed guidelines are consistent with the existing 2023 and to 2025 technical guidelines as listed here with minor edits to match the section changes. So here concludes the slides for the process, for the changes of the process and evaluation process chapters. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and we can open it up to comments and questions now. So if you do have a comment or a question, please follow the instructions on the screen.
We do have a hand raised from Gurpreet Kaur. Gurpreet, go ahead and unmute and ask your question. All right, let's move on to the next question. We're going to go to Lana Radchenko. Lana, go ahead and ask your question. Okay, let's move next to Jay Leno, PG&E.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
How you doing? Jay Lena with PG&E. My question is, does the petition to amend process set forth in section 4 replace the change order process? I just want to get confirmation on that. And if so, how will utilities submit the types of changes previously contemplated in the change order process?
Hey, Jay, thanks for your question. So it's not replacing the change order process per se. We just removed the change order process and then added this in. But if it is adopted as in draft, then the corporations will not be able to change the targets in their plan outside of the petition to amend process for the upcoming year, but the update guidelines will have the requirements on on what can be changed in the update filing process. So the targets would remain as adopted in the base WMP, the WMP update, or with the petition to amend. But if the corporation has a good cause for not meeting the targets that it had listed in the past, then it will have the opportunity to address that in the appropriate year compliance process.
Thank you for that. And when are the update guidelines coming?
That will be sometime next year.
All right, thank you.
Next, we're going to move on to Henry Burton.
Hi, this is Henry Burton with the Public Advocate's Office at the CPUC. I just wanted to inquire about the schedule for 2025 WMP submission and review. Are you planning to issue a proposed schedule when you put out package 2? And if so, do you have a sense of when you expect WMPs to be submitted next year?
Thanks, Henry. So on the schedule, since there may be a second round of comments on package 1, we are not anticipating having the schedule in time for package 2, since we're hoping to publish a package 2 around the same time that the comment period closes on package 1. But once we get through the first round of comments on package 1, we'll have more of an idea on if there will be a second round of comments. We do recognize that the ECs will need some time to work on their plans and to finish everything up. Therefore, we're not expecting to have any submissions prior to mid-February. And then also a note on that, we're also hoping to have a staggered schedule for plans this year, which is what we did with the previous base plans.
I just want to flag one concern that we have in the Public Advocate's Office about scheduling. I know the past couple of years, WMPs have been submitted sort of in the March, April timeframe. And we would recommend that the WMPs for this year not be submitted prior to mid-June, because our staff are going to be fully committed to working on another very large proceeding, which is Edison's cost recovery proceeding for the 2018 Woolsey fire. That is going to fully absorb our staffing capacity until June. And so we would request, if possible, that the WMPs be submitted no earlier than mid-June, knowing that the pre-submission completeness check will come a few weeks before that. So I just want to put that out for consideration at this point.
Okay. Thanks for that background, Henry.
All right, we're going to go back to Lana Radchenko.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I think I clicked on the wrong button last time. I did put my question in the chat as well. We were just wondering, we understand that the OEIS tables need to be submitted in Excel format, but was also wondering for the, in our case, the SDG&E tables or the specific IOU tables that we added in our last cycle, Do you want those also submitted in Excel format?
I believe that we would want Paul tables that are concluded anywhere in the plan, like also as Excel. So yes.
Okay, thank you.
Are you traveling somewhere? Are you in your car?
Okay, next we're going to go to John Rankin, SCE.
Hey there. Good morning. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thanks. Yeah, we had a question on the amend process. The example would be if we're awaiting a GRC outcome for those targets, this would be especially applicable to the, kind of large dollar amount hardening targets like cover conductor and undergrounding. Is it better to put for like 2027 and 2028, just kind of a TBD depending on a GRC outcome, and populate something for 2026? And then of course we'd update those through that process once we have a GRC outcome. Or is the idea to go ahead and put in the value for like the GRC forecast for all 3 years and then change it again once the GRC outcome comes out?
Do you have any more information on that, Susie, or any ideas?
Well, so just to clarify, John, the petition to amend process is specific to after an electrical corporation has received a GRC decision, general rate case decision from the CPUC. And at that point, the electrical corporation has 45 days to file a petition to amend. So the petition to amend process is not available unless you've already received the GRTC decision. So does that answer your question, or was there something else you were asking?
So yeah, slightly different. So we submit in our case, we'll submit the next base WMP before we have an outcome on the rate case, and the hardening targets are highly dependent on that outcome. So we're just trying to understand in this case, since we know that they will change, should we just have them have kind of a TBD value in there to indicate like it's a little bit premature for us to put a number in there because we don't have an outcome, and then once we get the GRC, then within 45 days we'd update it? Or do you want what would essentially be placeholder values in there, just because of the fact that we don't have a GRC outcome, so they're not certain? Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and understood that without the funding, you don't have the certainty of target. But your WMP, if that were the case, then electrical corporations would have TBD for a whole lot of their WMP submissions, which is not what we're looking for. So your WMP is your plan, is your electrical corporation plan for how you're going to address your wildfire risk. And then if there is the necessity to make changes to that plan based on your GRTC decision, then that is what would be addressed in the petition to amend.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right, next we have Jay Leno.
Good morning, Jay Leno with PG&E again. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, perfect. In section 5 of the process guidelines, the data request log section, Energy Safety states that the WMP data request log must be posted and maintained beginning with pre-submission of the WMP. My question is, does a 3-day response time for discovery set forth in previous versions of the process guidelines begin with the pre-submission of the WMP?
Thanks, Jay. And yes, the the period starts on the date that the submission is provided.
So confirming the 3-day turnaround for data
Yeah,
request
yeah.
starts whenever the pre-submission is filed.
Yeah, on that date.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Okay, going next to our written questions, we have a question from Lena McMillan asking, when is package 2 expected to be delivered?
So that is expected mid December. So a few weeks.
Okay, and then we have another question from Zoe Harold asking, is it possible to provide a red line version of package 1?
We might be able to. I can check with our legal team to see if that's something that we can do. But if we can, then yeah, we can work on that.
Okay. Henry Burton asks, will OEIS issue a proposed schedule with package 2?
It might not be at the same time as package 2. That's going to come down to if we have a second comment period on package 1, which we might not know at the time that we publish package 2.
Zoe Harold asks, can you clarify what is meant by Excel data tables being required annually, in quotes, outside of the QDR tables on slide 18? Does that mean that both a Q4 QDR and an annual data table will be required and that they will contain the same information?
Well, on the annual filings, that will be data directly related to the plans. So the targets, the projected expenditures, if there is any overlap with a Q4, then we would want that to be the same. But the idea is to break out this like annual data from other plans outside of the QDR. I believe we have the data team on if they wanted to provide any more information on that. They might need to be unmuted.
Yeah, Rain, can you unmute Jenny Reed, please?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, it says I'm muted still. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks. So I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question right, but my understanding was that the new data, like Excel data tables requirement was referring to tables that are in the PDF document. So it's not like it's separate. My understanding is that it's separate from, what we call the QDR. There have always been tables in the WMP, and I thought that that requirement was those tables. So maybe that's something that that ESPD staff can speak to, but that was my understanding.
Yeah, I think we're getting confused with the tables that we are requiring that have to be like in Excel format for all of the tables that are submitted in the plan, but also the new process of the data related to the WMP that's being submitted outside of the QDR. Those are two separate proposed changes there.
Right. So there have always been like some crossover between like some overlap or some implications between the tables that are included in the PDF document and the data that is submitted through the QDR. So, that's not a new thing. my understanding is that what is the new thing is that, those tables that would previously only have been in the PDF document would also be submitted through Excel. And so they just would be easier to work with and view than just being like locked in a PDF. The question of overlap or redundancy is like a separate question, maybe a valid question, but not really having to do with the changes. Like it's not something that is more or less than it was before. It's just a format thing to make the Excel, to utilize an Excel submission to make the PDF tables more accessible than having them solely in a PDF.
Thanks, Jenny.
All right, next question is from James Dewey of Public Advocates. He says, I understand there's a possibility for utilities to amend the WMP to align with the GRC. Would this include GRC categorized spendings with WMP initiative numbers, such as the WMP initiative numbers with MAT codes?
Would you happen to know that, Susie, or anyone else on the line?
I'm not familiar with the specific WMP initiative numbers with MAT codes, so much as to say that the intent of the petition to amend section is to allow the electrical corporations to amend or to at least request to amend WMP targets to align with funding approved in the GRC. So it would be one-for-one correspondence that anything that is discussed in the GRC decision with spending approved would be a potential category for a petition a petition to amend.
Right. Lena McMillan asks,
sorry, one more thing, James, if you want to, discuss in more detail, we're happy to discuss with you and your team.
Lena McMillan asks, what is the purpose of the Excel file with all the tables included in the WMP?
It makes it easier for us to have the data and to analyze it, evaluate it in Excel than just like a giant a table that's in a PDF.
Okay, and then next, I'd like to go to John Rankin at SCE. He has a live question.
Hey, morning. Coming through okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thanks. Yeah, just wanted to go back to the schedule and we're on a similar page as Henry with Cal Advocates. These WPs, as you guys know, are, in the hundreds of pages and a very substantial effort. So we're a little concerned by not knowing the deadline and the earlier suggestion that it might be as early as February. Is there any kind of directional guidance you can provide? Like, are we talking March or April or May, or just anything there will help given the significant effort it takes to put together a base WMP?
Yeah, I think right now all we have is that it won't be before mid-February, and that we're going to get the schedule out as soon as we can.
Okay, thanks.
All right, returning back to our written questions, we have a question from Charles Madison. Charles asks, I understand that the Excel files will be submitted for all tables included in the WMP. Can you confirm if this also applies to the data underlying all maps, graphs, and figures? Specifically, will the raw data for these visual elements be provided in a manipulatable format, such as excel.gdb or another usable file type?
For maps and all for maps, we have the new mapping requirement that in the plan there just needs to be one map when we do ask for a map. or a bunch of maps. We just need one that's in the plan, and then all the other maps in that and information related to that map. So like any of the metadata or anything that's like going, all the fields that are feeding that map can be hosted on a separate web page that the corporation hosts. But we don't need like all of that information submitted with the Excel files, though.
All right, next question comes from Henry Burton. The process and evaluation guidelines included in package 1 do not address data request rules and deadlines. Will those issues be addressed in package 2?
Yes, not technically in package 2, but it's going to be addressed in the energy safety policy-wide process guidelines. That isn't technically a part of package 2, but it's being worked on concurrently and will most likely be released alongside a package 2, and that's going to have like all that information and more in there. I can actually go back to that slide. So that's going to have information on the docket, on the DRs, on Harada, on naming conventions and extension requests.
Next, we have a question from Melissa Semser. Melissa asks, good morning. I would like to confirm that the only mechanism for the utilities to know that a change in target programs for an existing approved plan year is through the compliance process, which has an 18-month time lag. Given how quickly technologies and programs are evolving, it would be helpful to have a mechanism to communicate dialogue about such changes with energy safety.
Yeah, that's the only mechanism that I'm aware of right now. I'm not sure if compliance is still like at that timeline, but yeah, that's yeah, we can note that comment.
Just to clarify, so that's the only mechanism that the electrical corporations have to change their approved targets. So the approved targets will stay as they are in either the approved base WMP, the approved WMP update, or an individual changes to targets that might be approved through the petition to amend process. Then, as Dakota mentioned earlier, if the electrical corporation has good reason for not achieving those approved targets or has a good reason to, be tracking something slightly differently internally, then they can communicate that to compliance through the compliance process as number one, a part of the electrical corporation EC annual report on compliance, the ECARC, that is, I believe, due in March of the year after the compliance year ends, and then can also be discussing that with compliance and the environmental science division in their biweekly meetings, as they already do.
Okay. Next question comes from Crystal Bertolini. Appendix C for GIS files were requested in the 2023 to 2025 WMP under general guidelines. However, the 2026 to 2028 WMP section 2.2 mapping requirements removed Appendix C and directs us to post only to publicly available web applications. Today's workshop slides again include Appendix C. Will GIS be provided in Appendix C or is the web application or in the web application or both?
The language in Appendix C matches the language in the process guidelines section, or it aligns with it pretty well. So I'm not sure if we have the same requirements that were in the previous one that was being mentioned there.
Okay. Jay Lano from PG&E says 5.6 in section 4.1.1.1 of the process guidelines pre-submission check process Energy safety references a pre-submission checklist. Will this checklist be included in the final guidelines? If not, when does energy safety anticipate releasing the pre-submission checklist?
So that's in progress, and it will be released to the corporations separately from the publication process.
Lena McMillan asks, how would compliance division handle a year within the WMP cycle where work has already been done, but when the GRC decision comes out after? Example for SDG&E, the test year 2028 decision will come out late 2028, early 2029.
I'm not exactly sure how compliance would handle that.
Dakota, I can weigh in on this one. So, ultimately, this is up for the compliance division to answer, and not for us as the policy division to answer. But, I will say that, we're aware that sometimes the decision wouldn't come out until the end of the year in question. However, as pointed out in a previous question, our compliance process has an 18-month lag time. So the compliance process would have more of an opportunity to, take that into account. Given that the ARCs don't come out until, or aren't required to come out until 18 months after the compliance year ends.
Okay, and then next we have a question from Holly Werman at Cal Advocates. Another schedule question. The base WMPs are significantly longer than updates and take more effort to analyze. Has OEIS considered staggering the base WMPs? The last base WMPs were submitted in 2023, so a new base is not required until 2026. To smooth out resource requirements for interveners, it might be beneficial to require only 1 or 2 large IOUs to submit new base WMPs in 2025, with the remaining base WMPs in 2026, so that interveners are not tasked with receiving 3 large comprehensive WMPs at once.
Dakota, I can take this one as well. Thank you, Holly. That is something that we have internally discussed and considered, and we agree that that would potentially smooth out resource requirements for interveners and for our own staff. One consideration is that we feel like we need for the guidelines to stabilize before we would be able to have those staggered base WMP submissions, and so that is something that we're working on with an eye towards perhaps doing that in the future. But we're at this point, we actually we need all of the WMPs to submit their base WMPs this year, since it will be three plan years since they were last submitted, and then that's something that we might be able to consider in the future.
Next, we have a question from Wade Greenacre. Will the WMP submitted for the completeness check be public, or are they submitted to energy safety only to perform the completeness check?
Those will be submitted to us. I don't believe we're putting those on the docket.
All right, at this time, there are no more questions.
Okay, we can wait just like another minute or two just to see if anyone else has any before we take a break.
We do have a hand raised from Henry Burton.
Hi, this is Henry Burton with the Public Advocate's Office. I just wanted to follow up on that last point about staggering WMPs. I just double checked, and the statutory language on WMP submission says that each electrical corporation shall submit a comprehensive wildfire mitigation plan at least once every 3 years. And it's only been, at this point, about 1.5 years since the last batch of comprehensive WMPs was submitted. So there's no requirement in law that the utilities submit comprehensive WMPs in 2025. And I understand the desire to have the guidelines stabilized, but I actually think from what I've seen so far that the templates and guidelines have stabilized quite a lot. I don't see drastic changes from the previous couple of years.
Henry, understood. My comment was more towards that the WMPs that have already been submitted by the electrical corporations cover 2023 to 2025. We don't currently have plans for any electrical corporation for 2026. So unless we were to do a standalone year for some electrical corporations, which would require a separate set of guidelines, then we wouldn't be able to, at least as far as we can see, enact that in the immediate term. So we do need the 3-year 2026 to 2028 plans, before we can start to consider any type of a stagger.
Okay, going next to a written question from Gary Chen, SCE. If an intervenor requires a copy of the pre-submission, does the utility have to provide it?
That seems like a legal question. So if we have anyone on the line that can answer that, we can go to them, or if not, we'll have to take that one and get back to you on that. It looks like we might have to get back to you on that.
Okay. We do have something from the Q&A from Henry Burton, but it doesn't appear to be a question, just a clarification.
We can give it another minute or so if there are no more questions out there. All right, if there are no more questions, then we could move to the break. We ended a little bit early, but I think we can still come back at the scheduled time to talk about the technical chapter. Yeah, so I'll see everyone back here at 11:30. There are no more final questions. All right, I'll see everyone soon then. All right, it looks like we're at 11:30, and we have the same amount of people that we left with, so hopefully everyone's back. Before we move on to the technical chapter, I'll hand it over to Susie.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for all the great questions on our last session. I just was reflecting on the break and wanted to jump in and say that while we're doing our best to answer questions on the fly, thank you. Shout out to PG&E for getting us some of those questions on Friday, so we'd have a chance to discuss and formulate our answers beforehand. But for all the other questions, we're trying our best to answer the questions on the fly. Definitely want to emphasize that we're taking all of your comments and questions and making sure that we store them up to make sure that we address wherever necessary or possible between when we're finalizing our guidelines. And then also want to encourage you all to submit comments on anything that either you don't fully feel like was addressed in the Q&A, or that you have some follow-up thoughts on. Please address those in your written comments. As one example, Henry Burton's question about possibly staggering in the future, while we energy safety don't see a way to start that this year, since the plans are required to cover at least 3 years, and we don't have plans for 2026. That is something that Cal Advocates and some other interveners have commented on in the past, and we have internally been discussing if there's a way to address that in the future. I provided some thoughts prior to the break on what we've been discussing internally and are thinking around that process, but definitely welcome Henry, you and any other interveners who have specific suggestions on that to add that to your comments. And the more specific you can be, then the more likely it is we'll be able to operationalize it in the future. Thinking of that as we're heading into the next session, we again will do our best to answer questions on the fly, and we welcome written and oral comments for us to consider after the workshop is complete. Okay, thanks everyone. Back to Dakota.
Thank you, Susie. Okay, I guess we can move on to the technical chapter now, and I'll pass it over to Blythe.
Hey, thanks, Dakota. I am Blythe Denton. I'm a wildfire safety analyst with the Electrical Safety Policy Division here at Energy Safety, and I'll be taking us through the technical element section of the draft WMP guidelines and focusing on the additions, some revisions, and a few things to keep your eye out for. So our technical elements chapter, this is the section structure. The numbering in the guidelines will be matching the numbering in the WMPs, and we'll step through each of these sections. But first, next slide, please. First, let's look at some of the comprehensive changes. So the mitigation initiatives in the past were in a single section in section 8, and now they've been broken out into their own sections with several subsections. As you may have noticed in the previous slide, we have 13 sections total. Again, each of these grid ops, vegetation management, situational awareness, emergency preparedness, you'll see some new titles. We'll go through those and how things have been combined and separated out in this presentation. So energy safety moved also from the terms objectives and targets to be a little more descriptive with qualitative targets and quantitative targets. We're also requiring the addition of a master target table for each mitigation initiative section, and also no longer have the 10-year targets. So it's really focusing in on those 1- and 3-year targets within that 3-year cycle. So for sections 1 through 3, the intro sections 1 and 2 aren't much different from previous submissions. 10-page summary, and then the responsible persons section. Section 3, the overview of the WMP Please note that the performance metrics and climate change subsections are now housed here. The performance metrics, the electrical corporation must list the performance metrics beyond those required by energy safety, and that the electric corporations use to evaluate the effectiveness of their plans. And then for climate change, the description must include references to the EC's most recent climate vulnerability assessment, addressing new or exacerbated risks related to wildfire. One of the things to note is where there are page limits, please pay attention to the page limits for this section. I believe there was a two-page limit, but those are throughout the guidelines. So section 4, the overview of service territory, is now just 3 subsections. So we have service territory, that's the area served, who's being served, the infrastructure, and a representative map, catastrophic wildfire, a narrative summary of covering the past 20 years, the stats of the EC ignition catastrophic fire as reported by the Electric Corporation, CAL FIRE, or other authoritative government sources. Additionally, the Electric Corporation must provide catastrophic wildfire statistics in a tabular form provided. And then a notable change here in section 4 is the relocation of the frequently de-energized circuits to overview of service territory. From previously, it was housed in the PSPS section. We'll talk about the revamped PSPS section in a little bit, but here in section 4, the EC must populate a table and provide a map showing its frequently de-energized circuits related to planned outages. All right, section 5, risk methodology and assessment. There are a lot of updates to this in terms of the framework, components, and vocabulary. I'd like to remind everyone that the definitions are in the guidelines, and we do have people available during the question and answer period for this. But please note that the outage program risk is in a new box in the framework, and the new terms in the WMP guidelines are to better align with 884 and CPUC concepts. The right side of this diagram used to have PSPS risk in blue at the same level as wildfire risk. We have moved things around. And additionally, that some of the vocabulary changes are burn probability to burn likelihood, ignition risk to wildfire risk. We've added outage program risk as well as PEDS risk. So the protective equipment and device settings. And again, those definitions are laid out in the WMP guidelines. So just a real quick note, a lot of the tables have been modified, and then examples have been given for those tables to make the expectations of what energy safety is looking for clearer for all parties. And the examples demonstrate the minimum levels of information. So that's not just for section 6 wildfire mitigation strategy development, but that is throughout the document. So here in wildfire mitigation strategy development, we've added risk evaluation process. The ECs must provide lists that identify, describe, and prioritize circuit segments based solely on overall utility risk, including associated risk drivers. Another update is to the risk impact calculations. For each initiative, the ECs must calculate the expected reduction of wildfire risk, outage program risk, and combined overall risk, including the cost-benefit score. Wildfire mitigation strategies is revised to require the percentage of work planned within the HFRA. So now we're at PSPS, Public Safety Power Shutoff. That is now Section 7, previously Section 9. It has been moved before the mitigation sections. The ECs must provide a narrative that is supported by the plan mitigations and the sections that follow. So this narrative must describe how it will, how an EC will reduce the need for and impact of future PSPS implementation on frequently de-energized circuits. The narrative also includes lessons learned from PSPS events since the last WMP submission and mitigation methodology for reducing PSPS events in the future. So this is a preview to some of the actions, planned actions that'll happen in the following sections. Section 8, this is the big one, grid design, operations, and maintenance. There are 3 slides covering some of the subsections that have received some modifications, additions, and revisions since the last base guideline. So section 8.2, grid design and systems hardening. Each initiative must have distinct and trackable targets. So ECs can internally track combined activities, and however, for energy safety, please note that these activities must be distinct and trackable. They are to be separated and not clumped together. Added details regarding the impacts of activities on wildfire and outage program risk. You'll notice a pattern here. These include risk reduction calculations, trend analysis, discussion of the mitigation impact on both likelihood and consequence. Also including the reliability impact calculations, consideration of harden's status of upstream and downstream spans, and the impact on likelihood and consequence. Section 8.3, asset inspection additions, is the requirement of percentage of HRFA covered by inspection targets annually, including the find rate of level 1, 2, and 3 conditions. Section 4 revisions for, this is, sorry, not section 4, sorry, section 8.4 for equipment maintenance and repair. There are revisions including conditioning monitoring, maintenance strategy, replacement repair conditions, remediation timeframe, failure and ignition rates and causes. So, all right, QA/QC section 8.5, and this is a spoiler. This is similar to some of the changes to the vegetation management QA/QC. But for now, focusing on 8.5, it must include the program objectives, sampling methodology, pass rate calculations, and other metrics that evaluate the effectiveness of QA/QC. This is all in addition to the pass-fail rate. So grid ops and procedures, equipment settings, section 8.7 now includes the percentage of time protective equipment device settings were enabled, tabular data for the top 10 most impacted circuits, risk reduction effectiveness calculations, and the number of ignitions that occurred while the settings were active. All right, got through that. Section 9, vegetation management and inspections. So please note that each section will have instructions on targets. And this is one of those, something to keep a lookout for. Some will require both quantitative and qualitative, some just qualitative, some will have just for just one qualitative or quantitative for each initiative. So please read carefully on what those requirements are. There are also requirements for specified initiatives. So within vegetation management, some modified initiative structure covers the clearance, fall-in mitigation, and high-risk species are rolled into inspections. Pruning and removal activities are given separate subsections. Fire resilient right-of-way is now integrated vegetation management. So I mentioned previously about the QA/QC from section 8.5 that would look familiar. So in section 9, again, program objectives, sampling methodology, pass rate calculations, and other metrics that evaluate the effectiveness of vegetation management in addition to the pass-fail rate. Section 10 for situational awareness. This is one of those, again, making sure it's not an or, but an and when it comes to the targets. So it's the added requirement for both quantitative and both qualitative and quantitative targets for each initiative listed in this section. Energy safety has incorporated one of the recurring AC areas of continued improvement into its own subsection for weather station maintenance and calibration. This is one of those subsections that does require a target, along with several others that are listed in the guidelines for section 10. So section 11, this has seen some changes. So in order to reduce redundancy, there's a consolidation of emergency preparedness and community outreach into this overarching community preparedness, collaboration, and public awareness. But if we take something out, you have to add something in. So there's the addition focus on tribal outreach and interaction. Please note that the target instructions for each section may be slightly different in terms of what is required. This section is updated to require at least one qualitative target for each initiative. No quantitative targets are required. And also to reduce copy and paste, any requested information in a subsection, if it's already been reported, it can now be provided via a cross-reference hyperlink. Right, section 12, it's a new standalone section for enterprise systems. And you must provide at least one qualitative and one quantitative target for each initiative. You must provide a narrative that discusses the topics such as the data storage, internal data updating process, asset identification, data integrity, accessibility, and retention, QA/QC of data and the systems, and employee or contractor ability to access and interact with the data systems. So how are people using this? How are you maintaining integrity during upgrades and software and changes in programs and how that data is being QA/QC'd? And another standalone section is the lessons learned. So for these lessons learned, we're looking for a narrative that's tied to feedback from any of these entities or documents, including government agencies, areas for continued improvement, what was learned from previous WMP cycles, findings from energy safety compliance audits reports. In this section, the ECs must also report on working group meetings and also any discontinued activities from previous WMPs. And again, looking for that lessons learned of why discontinued and what, I'm sorry. So why those initiatives, activities were discontinued.
Thanks, Blythe. Alrighty, we can move into the public question and comment period for the technical chapter. Please ask questions in the same way as we did for the process chapter. So either raise your hand or put it in the chat or any of the other instructions on the screen.
Our first question, we have our first hand raised is from Jay Leno at PG&E.
All right, good afternoon, Jay Lena with PG&E. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. This is related to the QA/QC targets. So section 8.1 specifically requires QA/QC as a target, while section 9.1 in VM does not. Does this mean that there is no requirement to submit targets for VM QA/QC that will be reportable in the QDR?
For the QDR, we might need to go to Jenny on that. If she has that information.
Or does it need to be a target in general? Because we're just looking at 8.1 specifically calls out QA/QC, but 9.1 for VM doesn't.
If it's not there, then I don't believe you would have to, but we do have some VM experts on the line just to see if that was an oversight or on purpose, maybe.
Hi, just generally, this is Jenny speaking. Jenny Reed with the Data Analytics Division. Just generally speaking, I wouldn't assume that just because any given thing isn't mentioned in the WMP guidelines that it isn't in the QDR. There has been data collected in the QDR that is not specifically called out in the WMP guidelines, always. So that's just kind of a general thing. But in terms of a specific target, if that's in the chat, it would be helpful. And then I can actually look for the specific target.
Perfect. I could drop it in.
Okay, our next question.
Can I just jump in on that? This is Kira Purvis on VM. If you look at table 9.5, the example of vegetation management QA/QC program targets, those do have specific targets for the QA/QC. It may just not be mentioned in that first section, but is discussed more in detail in section 9.10, which talks about the QA/QC programs. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but we can always follow up with more.
Okay, next we have John Rankin from SC.
Hey, thanks. One question about the targets. In chapter 6, there's a table, table 6-3, that asks for a list of targets. And our understanding is that that list, or that table rather, 6.3, would basically be the sort of complete list of all of the quantitative targets. In other words, if in the later chapters on mitigation initiative activities have a quantitative target, that quantitative target would show up in that table on in chapter 6. Am I reading that correctly, or is there a distinction, and that table in chapter 6 would actually have a slightly different scope than just simply a list of the quantitative targets?
Yeah,
Yeah, I can speak to this a little bit. So table 6-3 is mostly looking for like the risk reduction and percentages in the overall cost benefit scores, whereas the targets in section 8, for example, would be more like numerical values like miles of installation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the fields are a tiny bit different. I guess we're just asking if like you would have a kind of an initiative activity that would show up in one of those but not the other.
Nothing springs to mind off the top of my head.
Okay, so if there's a initiative activity that's got a quantitative target, you would anticipate seeing it in that table in chapter 6.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thanks.
All right, next we have Holly Werman with Cal Advocates.
Hey, this is Holly Werman with Cal Advocates. I have a question on, I'm looking at section 6131, identifying in and evaluating initiative activities, and how that relates to 8.2 for grid hardening. So a couple points I wanted to make in 6131, there's a discussion of expected risk reduction and costs for mitigations that can be feasibly deployed in combination. So that's something that we are glad to see because I think we've raised in comments in the past concerns about utilities not appearing to evaluate all reasonable combinations of mitigations. So for example, in a comparison between, say, undergrounding and overhead hardening, a utility might present an effectiveness comparison of undergrounding compared to a covered conductor by itself, when a more realistic and reasonable implementation would be covered conductor in combination with fast trip settings, or I think those are being called PEDs in this draft. And the effectiveness of those fast trip settings in combination with covered conductor is substantially better than covered conductor alone, and that's a more reasonable comparison to something like undergrounding. So my first comment is that we would like to see similar language repeated in section 8.2, directing utilities to evaluate these mitigations that can be feasibly deployed in combination. I also see that in 8.2, there's language asking utilities to state their assumptions. I would be interested in seeing more strict language directing what assumptions utilities should be making. For example, costs, in our view, should reasonably be based on historical costs of that same mitigation. And comparisons should be made under the assumption that those alternatives are being deployed at similar scales, and so can achieve similar efficiency costs. And for effectiveness, it should be evaluated under the assumption that reasonable mitigations are being deployed in tandem, and those can, as much as possible, should be based on observed effectiveness values rather than estimated. So these are just things that we have noted and commented on in the past, and I think that incorporating some of these into the guidelines could lead to more robust analyses by in terms of grid hardening.
Thanks, Holly.
That's all I have.
Yeah, that's definitely something I've written down your comments and we'll review it.
All right, next we have another question from Jay Leno at PG&E.
Good afternoon again, Jay Leno with PG&E. Just want to understand confirmation again for targets. So for grid design and VM, it's either a qualitative or a quantitative. For situational awareness and enterprise systems is both qualitative and quantitative. And then for emergency preparedness, collaboration, and public awareness is only a qualitative. Is that understanding correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Dakota.
Right, next we have a question from Aaron Louie.
Check. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. I just had a question on like how related to QA/QC. I just wanted to see how does energy safety sort of view the QA/QC program sort of being implemented by the utilities in terms of not only reporting the data, is there like an ideal situation or quote unquote place that energy safety envisions the utilities achieving or reaching within their QA/QC programs during this next WMP cycle? This sort of just relates and stems back to just all the all the utilities being at different places and in terms of reporting accurate data related to their QA/QC for both asset management, vegetation management, and even in terms of construction building related to system hardening programs.
Is there anyone from Grid or from VM who can speak to this a bit more?
So Dakota, I can jump in here. So, I think that's a good question, Aaron, but we're really not prepared to answer that on the workshop about the guidelines. The guidelines are laying out the requirements for what the utilities are, required to put in their wildfire mitigation plans. And then, our evaluation process is, well, I shouldn't say separate from that, definitely related to that, but we're not really prepared to comment on that right now. I will say that again, if that's something that you're interested in, you could put in your written comments and we can see if we can address that further in some way.
Thank you. Definitely will consider that.
All right, next we have a question from Zoe Harold.
Hi, thanks. Zoe Harold from GPI here. So for section 5.3 risk scenarios, and then under that, the design basis scenarios, is the intention essentially for utilities to produce multiple different planning risk model outputs based on these different required design basis scenarios? And if so, where are all those different outputs getting reported?
So I think I can take this. Yeah, I think the intent is to have various scenarios that they're modeling, but I don't think we're asking specifically for all of those outputs.
So are they just like are they only reporting on the ones that they apply to basically inform their mitigation plan, or do they have to do them but not report them, the other ones?
Yeah, I believe they're only reporting on the ones that they're actually using and implementing, but I need to double check in terms of the ones that are not being actively used for mitigation selection.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. I think it would be a little confusing to me on a plan preparation side if I had to prep something, but no one was going to look at it. So that might be something to assess of whether or not there is a reporting requirement. Otherwise, I can't really see them getting done. And then kind of what the application is if it is actually required for the utilities to complete all of these design bases and report them all. And then I think there's also a component of like, what does that reporting look like? Because currently, we mostly have the granular risk model, and sorry, I'll be specific, planning risk model outputs in Excel spreadsheets. And so whether or not there is a requirement to also provide graphical or mapped outputs. Thanks so much.
All right, our next question comes from Jay Leno at PG&E.
Good afternoon again, Jay Leno with PG&E. My next question is around section 8.1.2, which is for quantitative targets. It states that only inspection-related activities are required to have quarterly targets, with all other activities only requiring end-of-year total targets. At its discretion, the electrical corporation may provide further granularity as available. However, the example in table 8.1 shows quarterly targets for system hardening. Is it correct to understand that quarterly targets may be reported at the discretion of the utility for non-inspection related activities, but only are required for inspection related activities?
Yes, I believe that interpretation is correct. So it's only required quarterly for inspections, but utilities can use their discretion on if they want to provide quarterly for other targets.
Yeah, that's correct. And we'll probably update that example that's in the draft guidelines just to make that more clear.
All right, moving on to our written questions. We have a question from Lena McMillan. She asks, are plan objectives in section 3.2 different from qualitative targets?
They are, yes. The plan objectives are the more like overarching things, objectives of the plans, and the qualitative targets, which used to be called objectives in the previous guidelines, are now a specific like the targets for these initiative sections. That's part of the reason why we made the change from calling them objectives to qualitative targets to avoid that overlap in using the word objectives.
Right. Our next question comes from Lana Redchenko. It says section 6.2.1.2, table 6.3 versus section 8.2 appears to be asking for duplicative risk information. Can we reference back to table 6-3 for the quantitative information that is presented in the table?
Yeah, that is fine. I'm assuming you're talking about the effectiveness calculations. It's possible that those are the same. Table 6-3 has the distinction that it's overarching effectiveness, whereas section 8.2, utilities can determine the granularity, so it might be different. And also 8.2 goes more into detail of like how those effectiveness calculations were determined. So it could be referenced, but it's also possible that they might be different based on the granularity.
Right. Next question from Melissa Semser. Says in section 3.4 of the process guidelines, prioritize list of wildfire risks and risk drivers. Utilities are required to provide topographical and climatological risk factors associated with each risk and risk driver. Are climatological risk factors limited to current climatological conditions, or should future conditions as examined in the CAVA be considered? Risk drivers vary depending on location and services in service to territory. Is there a preferred way? For to present its prioritized list to reflect the diversity of its service territory? For example, should the utility submit risks at the CPZ level or the regional level?
Yeah, thanks for that question. This is one that we're going to have to take back and keep like looking at, and we can provide some more clarification in this section for those questions.
All right, next from Eric Wu, CPUC. In the presentation, energy safety references HFRA multiple times. Can you explain why not using HFTDs, as HFTDs have gone through public process for common understanding and are more commonly accepted?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this one. So in the slides, we're specifically asking for HFRA, but it's just because we've summarized it. In these sections, we're asking for both HFRA and HFTD. And the reason that we're including HFRA is that as the utilities have continued to develop their risk models, they have some of the information is more recent than the HFTD maps, which haven't been updated in some time, which is why we want to capture that information as well, because there could be risk present in areas outside of the HFTD.
Next question is from Jay Leno. Putting my verbal question in the chat as requested. Section 8.1 specifically requires QA/QC targets, while Section 9.1 in VM does not. Does this mean that there is no requirement to submit targets for a VM QA/QC that will be reportable in the QDR?
I think we already answered that one live, but appreciate, Jay, you putting that in the chat so we can keep track of it for our finalizing the guideline.
In Section 8, from Lana Radchenko, in Section 8.2, page 79, updates to activity, references UG. Is that a typo, or do we have to speak on how every initiative impacts UG?
I think that's the purpose of as applicable, so you don't need to speak to every activity's impact on undergrounding.
Next question from Crystal Bertolini, section 9.2.1.2 VM asks to provide work procedures for inspections. This differs from the other sections that require detail on process. Can you please provide for context as to why procedures are required for VM instead of the process? Thank you.
I think that's something that we will have to follow up on and clarify.
Next question is from Charles Madison. I keep seeing expected risk reduction in the target information requirements, such as at page 151. Should these expectations be formalized into a standardized trackable metric to ensure accuracy and accountability for mitigation efforts?
That might be one that we need to keep looking at for each of the sections as well. If you can put that one in the chat too, and we'll write that one down as well.
Yeah, I know it's loosely defined in 6.2.1.2, but in terms of like exact standardization on how to do that, we don't currently have it standardized.
Next question is from Melissa Semser. PG&E seeks clarity on the second bullet of section 6.1.3 initiative selection process, which requires utilities to explain the process used by subject matter experts to provide their judgment. Specifically, PG&E seeks to understand if energy safety is seeking a decision-making schematic or something different.
The schematic would work in that situation.
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily has to be a schematic. I think also just a narrative description of how judgment is provided would also work.
Our next question comes from Lana Radchenko. In section 3.2, is OEIS expecting a copy and paste of the qualitative targets or looking for high-level visionary objective statements by area?
I believe the plan objectives are they have their own separate requirements outside of the qualitative those targets. So we do want those like separated, and like those are more like high level based on what we are asking for in that subsection of the guidelines.
Melissa Semser also asks, PG&E seeks to confirm its understanding of section 6.1.3.3 initiative activity scheduling as only applying to initiatives in which a single project takes multiple years to implement, and PG&E determines that interim mitigation measures are necessary. PG&E's understanding is that this would not apply to initiatives where targets are staggered across multiple years, but work is completed in a given year. For example, installation of covered conductor will occur across multiple years, but execution of a specific project can occur within a 1-year timeframe.
Yeah, so on this section, this is supposed to be for initiatives within a program that can take more than 1 year to implement, and not for programs with or the targets that span multiple years. I'm not sure if Andy or Ethan wants to add anything else to that.
All right. Next question is from
Rain, I can jump in on that one a little bit more. I think the intention here is for mitigation initiative activities that once an electrical corporation decided, yes, we want to use this mitigation activity, that it would take more than a year from that point until the mitigation activity was deployed. So we can work to clarify that in the guidelines.
Our next question comes from Lena McMillan. Would energy safety consider requiring only a qualitative target for enterprise systems?
We can take that comment into consideration.
Melissa Semser asks, in section 10.4 ignition detection systems, the 4th bullet, energy safety requests the utilities identify venues for routine sharing of certain information regarding new ignition detection technologies and systems. PG&E requests clarity on what energy safety means by venues.
Venues can mean any systems, technologies, and or the procedures used like in that subsection, and that's something that I will further clarify in the updated version of the guidelines.
Then Melissa also asks, in section 6.2.1.1, projected overall risk reduction refers to an electrical corporation submitted 10-year plan. Which 10-year plan is being referenced?
That was leftover language, and so I will be like editing it out from draft to final.
Next question is from Gary Chen, SCE. Noting the language in section 12.1 where there is no implementation or improvement to an enterprise system ongoing or planned, or in other words, use of the enterprise system is stable and no changes are being made. Would a target be required under section 12, or are targets only relevant and required where there is a current or planned improvement or implementation?
We can take that one and provide some clarification for that kind of situation.
Jonathan Woldemariam from SDG&E asks, is PSPS risk now equal to outage program risk?
That is a subset. Go ahead, Andy.
Oh yeah, correct. It's a subset of outage program risk. So PSPS risk is included as a portion of outage program risk, but outage program risk encompasses more, including PEDS risk.
Next question is from Melissa Swenson, Pacific Power. In section 6.1.3 initiative selection process, it states the electrical corporation is expected to use its procedures discussed in section 9 to develop potential initiative activities approaches to address each risk, characterize the potential initiative activities to provide internal decision makers with information required to support decision making, e.g. cost material availability, including an assessment of uncertainties, and document the results of the evaluation. Section 9 is vegetation management and inspections. Can you clarify what procedure ECs are to use in section 9?
That is probably something we'll have to take a look at and further clarify and make sure that we have a correct section reference there.
All right, next question is from Jay Leno at PG&E. In section 8.3 asset inspections, energy safety requires utilities to identify the find rate of level 1, 2, and 3 conditions over the calendar years prior to the base WMP submission. PG&E understands this is to include 2022, 2023, and 2024 in this case, but asks energy safety to confirm this understanding. PG&E notes that depending on the pre-submission date, PG&E may not yet have complete data for 2024.
Yeah, that understanding is correct. And we don't intend to have any submissions occur prior to the due date of the Q4 a QDR data. So there should be at least a full month to incorporate the Q4 find rates.
And then next we have a live question from Jay Leno at PG&E.
Jay Leno, PG&E again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. My question is related to section 12.1.2, which is enterprise systems quantitative targets. So energy safety requires utilities to provide the expected percentage of risk reduction for enterprise systems over each of the 3-year WMP. Enterprise systems enable the risk reducing mitigations they support, but in and out of themselves may not directly reduce risk. PG&E seeks guidance on how energy safety envisions utilities might measure and report on risk reduction from enterprise systems.
Thanks, Jay. That's one that we're going to take back and continue to refine and collaborate on that one more.
At this time, there are no other questions.
Okay, we can wait a few more minutes just to make sure.
We do have a question from Minal. In section 8.2 outage program risk referring only to PSPS. Is section 8.2 outage program risk referring only to PSPS and PED outages?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, it's based off figure 5-1.
So let me jump in on this one too. I believe that figure 5-1 is an example of the minimum components that would make up the overall utility risk framework. The guidelines also say that electrical corporation may elect to include additional risk components as needed to better define risk for its service territory.
We have another question from Jay Leno at PG&E. PG&E wishes to clarify if Section 3.3 of the Technical Guidelines Utility Initiative Tracking IDs is solely instructional and that no information is required to be submitted by the utility in this section.
That's correct. That section is informational, and it's meant to provide a cross-reference to the data guidelines for consistency. All right, I just have a couple slides at the end to close us out, but if you still have any questions or if you think of one while I'm doing that, then please still raise your hand and put it in the chat. But for now, we can talk about some upcoming dates and information on public participation. So the opening comments for package 1 are due on December 6th. That is next Friday. And then reply comments are due December 12th. So the Thursday after that. Package 2 documents are expected to be published mid December, so around the time that reply comments are due. And as we've mentioned, a submission and evaluation schedule is forthcoming. Some more information on the docket. We have one specifically for the guidelines, and it's the primary source of all information related to the guidelines. And you can, we have a link here that we will provide. It's on the cover letter of the draft package 1, and it will remain an active link when we publish these slides as well. And also, as mentioned, if there are a lot of changes made to this version of the package 1 documents, then there will be a second draft of these guidelines published, and that will mean that there will be an additional comment period prior to adoption of these new guidelines. And that is all we had for today. So I'll open it again for questions one last time.
I also wanted to say, first of all, thanks to all of you for your participation in today's workshop. Thanks for all the great questions and comments. We're looking forward to seeing your written comments as well. And I wanted to give a big thank you to Dakota and the guidelines team, as well as our subject matter experts who joined us here today. The team has been working hard to produce the guidelines at the same time as evaluating the WMP updates and producing the decision. So it's definitely been a lot of work, and huge thanks to Dakota for leading up the effort throughout the year.
Thanks, Susie. And seeing or hearing no questions, I think we're good to call it. So just want to thank everyone for coming, and a reminder to provide us with any written comments that you may have. Thanks again for coming, and yeah, I think that'll close us out.